Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Your feedback very much appreciated. I thought last week's episode of the show went down quite well. I certainly enjoyed it. I think it's always interesting to look at sort of whiskey that's been aged in different types of oak to the usual. And I kind of love the fact that Rassay have released that sort of little tasting pack to give you an insight. I wish more distilleries would release those kind of things, certainly given the price of whiskey these days. But anyway, I suppose the link between last week and this week is oak. Always is with whiskey, isn't it, funnily enough. This week we're looking primarily American white oak. So as you can see from the title page, it's an American episode of the show. It's been a while since I've done one, and I've been thinking about doing one for a while, and certainly I really fancy doing a rye episode of the show, and it took some digging to find enough samples to do an episode of the show on American rye, in inverted commas, I suppose. But I have done all these samples, bar one came from either bottles I purchased or used for whiskey tastings, and one of them I believe is from dates way back to the time of when I was doing the new releases tastings for the whiskey magazine, so that shows you how old that is. But obviously I will introduce that one when I get onto the lineup. So basically, there's not really an awful lot to say. I'm not going to go into sort of great detail about all these distilleries. They're all fairly well-known distilleries, as the case may be. I mean, one thing I will say is that obviously, as you well know, American whiskey is built primarily on brands rather than sort of distilleries per se. And unlike, I mean, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, you know, we have things like the Heaven Hill distillery that produces a number of different brands and so on, and Jim Beam and what have you, and nobody actually bats an eyelid about them. It's kind of a sort of an accepted norm, I suppose, whereas when these new distilleries crop up and they don't have obviously mature stock for obvious reasons, and they bottle stock from other distilleries, you know, MGP being the prime example in America, that's when everybody starts going, whoa, you're not bottling your own whiskey and all this kind of stuff. I mean, the same goes for, you know, newer distilleries in Ireland, probably more so in Ireland. It seems to be, you know, a really big issue with Irish whiskey, you know, and I suppose it's because of, again, the relative lack of a gene pool of stock. And I suppose probably the biggest problem is the lack of transparency. I mean, if you sort of like say, look, you know, this is not our spirit, we've sourced it from so and so and so, until we've got our own spirit, everybody's probably okay, and as long as it's fairly priced. And I think that's probably the big problem, is that so many distilleries, these new distilleries, are releasing sort of stock that's not their own and pricing it stupidly expensive, and people are going, why, you know? But anyway, I'm not here to sort of answer the whys and wherefores of that. That's obviously down to individual distilleries, how they want to sort of do that kind of thing. But anyway, I think it's enough waffle. Let's just take a look at today's lineup. Okay, so we're going to kick off with a relatively new bottling. Certainly it was new to the UK last year. I don't know whether it was new to America as well, but this is the Elijah Craig Straight Rye whiskey. It's 47%, and whereas most rye whiskies, as you well know, the sort of the rye content is certainly between 80 and 90 odd percent, Elijah Craig, or Heaven Hill as the case may be, have decided that they're going to do it slightly differently. They're going to produce a slightly sort of less rye intense rye. So this is just over the legal minimum to be called a rye whiskey. 51% rye, 33% corn and 14% malted barley. Second bottling is the Few Spirits Straight Rye, bottled at 46.5%. Don't have any information on what the ABV, what the percentage of rye is in the mash bill, but I've always had well, it's always been a bit on the young side, hasn't it? Few spirits, so never one I've amazingly warmed to. So we'll see what that's about. That sample, by the way, dates back to 2023. Next bottling is a little bit of a contentious bottling, I suppose. This is the WhistlePig Straight Rye 12-year-old Old World Series, bottled at 45%. Now, some of you will probably go, but hang on, it's bottled at 43%. That's because this particular sample comes from 2016 when I reviewed it for the Whiskey magazine. Now, back then, it was 45%. A couple of years later, I guess somewhere around about 2018, 2019, the ABV was dropped to 43%, and I think there was, well, the obvious reason was kind of money, and so many of these big companies, and WhistlePig is not a small company. I mean, it's owned by well, bloody great big investment companies, isn't it? And I think basically there was two factors that factored into this. One, that the creator of the whiskey, Dave Pickerell, died in 2018, and in 2019 the former owner, the guy that started the company, Raj Peter Bakhtar, sold his stake out to a company called BDT Capital Partners, and I think basically the bean counters kind of got involved and said, we need to drop this to 43%. I don't understand why they needed to do that, and it upset an awful lot of people. It's exactly the same thing that Buffalo Trace did with their Buffalo Trace bottling. They've dropped the ABV down from, I think it was 45 to 40%, purely to get more of their whiskey into bars, and it just ruined the whiskey. And I think pretty much a lot of people have said the same thing about the WhistlePig. And also the fact is it's not cheap. It never has been a cheap whiskey. I mean, I think the current release, the 43%, is £123 in the Whiskey Exchange. I mean, for a 12-year-old, that is a lot of money. I mean, yes, all right, 12-year-old in general relative terms of American whiskies is quite old, because as we well know, American whiskies generally tend to be bottled pretty young. But even so, if you think of it as a 12-year-old spirit, it's still an awful lot of money. But anyway, so this is kind of historical stock, shall we say, and there may well be some 45% bottling still knocking around on auction sites, but obviously this is a not to be repeated tasting, I suppose. Next bottling we'll be looking at is a good old bottling from Jim Beam. This is the Knob Creek Straight Rye, bottled at 50%. Not much to say about that, apart from I remember when I first encountered Knob Creek, it was kind of like, whoa, what the hell is this? You know, the rye intensity of the bourbon was kind of like off the charts, with that sort of intense, bitter rye character. And when I first tasted it, I hadn't been tasting whiskey that long, and I mean, so we're going back to the early 2000s, and my experience with American whiskey had been more of the sort of softer corn fat bourbons, and so it was a bit of a shock to the system when I encountered Knob Creek. But anyway, I'm kind of used to it now. I'm a big boy now, I can cope. So anyway, we'll push on. The next bottling is probably one of the most revered of the rye whiskies from the States. This is again a Heaven Hill bottling, Pikesville 6-year-old 110 proof straight rye, otherwise bottled at 55%. It has a mash bill of 51% rye, 35% corn and 14% malted barley. So in actual fact, at the lower end of the spectrum, it's very similar to the mash bill for Elijah Craig, which I must admit is actually quite a surprise, because, well, I always thought it was higher in rye content. But anyway, so 6 years old and bottled at 55%. Final bottling of the afternoon is from the independent bottling company Barrell Craft Spirits. This is their small batch rye. This is batch number 4, bottled at 57.85%. And as you know, all their bottlings have a tendency to be sort of blends of spirits sourced from obviously other distilleries, and this is a blend of 5, 6 and 10-year-old Indiana whiskey, so probably IDL I would have thought, 5-year-old Tennessee, 6-year-old Kentucky rye, and a 14-year-old Canadian rye. So the resulting mash bill is 89% rye, 7% corn and 4% malted barley. And as you may well remember, did an episode of the show on them last year, I think it was, when I first encountered their bottlings, and their bottlings are bloody good. So I think it's going to be an interesting ride to finish with. So that's the lineup. Let's kick off with a bit of Elijah Craig then, shall we? Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Elijah Craig Straight Rye, 47%. Let's see what those gives on this thing, shall we? Well, first off, the corn is obviously the most noticeable, and it's got that lovely sweet corn character. There's a little bit of citrus that stops it being so fat. There's some corn oil, pepper. The rye is kind of sat back, shall we say, which is not a surprise, given that it's relatively low in general terms. There's some nice sweet oak, a little bit of an edgy rind note kind of comes through, but it's got that lovely soft appealing, it's the sort of rye that if you've never had a rye whiskey before and you're a little bit unsure, this is an ideal one to go for, because it gives you some of the rye intensity, but it has the sweetness there. It has the sweetness of the corn, and it's not too kind of like, it's not like going straight for sort of like the Knob Creek, you know. I suppose it's kind of like whiskey terms, it's kind of like going for a lightly peated malt over sort of jumping straight in at the Lefroy end of the spectrum, I suppose. But I like it. It's lovely. It's a lovely nose. I mean, you know, Heaven Hill, great distillery. I mean, all right, some of their entry-level bottlings are a bit kind of ho-hum, but yeah, they do make some bloody good spirit. Anyway, let's see what the power's like. That's lovely. So it kicks off with the sweet oak, the sweet corn, and you can feel the rye starting to build on the mid palate. A little biscuitiness, a little rye biscuit kind of note, a little dark rye spice, and it just builds slowly on the mid palate. Lovely, juicy, citric, peppery finish. Again, it has a lovely balance, and it's a good entry-level rye whiskey, I would say. Yeah, very good entry-level rye whiskey, really well priced, good intensity. And if, like I said, if you've never had rye whiskey before and want to experience rye whiskey, this is a really good one to start off. It kind of leads you in. It's, like I said, it's got plenty of softness of the corn and the oak. It's just so juicy. That is absolutely gorgeous. I really like that. The song goes on, but you're always my concern. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Fuse Spirits Straight Rye, 46.5%. Let's see what they've on this end, shall we? Right, and here we are at practically the other end of, well, almost the other end of the rye spectrum. Lots of dark rye spice, raw, almost kind of fusel spirit, dark rye bread, vanilla, marzipan. There's quite a lot of oak going on there now. I mean, I do remember well, maybe one's memory is playing tricks, but I remember it being a lot less oaky, the Fuse Spirits bottling, and a lot more raw spirit. I mean, there is a rawness there. I mean, it's, you know, it's obviously around, you know, 2 years old. I mean, probably just about, I would imagine. And this is like I said at the beginning, it's always the issue I've had with Fuse Spirits. It's just a bit too young, a bit too raw. I know there's a lot of people that like that, but for me, I'm just not getting into it, shall we say. A little bit of cinnamon, there's some cumin, not cumin, oh, what's that, spice, cardamom, a little bit of cardamom coming through. Let's see what that's like. bitterness on the finish. It's a bit short. Again, it kicks off with quite a lot of oak, sweet oak, sort of sweet vanilla, and then in comes this kind of youngish kind of spirit, a little bit of kind of odd, it's an odd kind of sweet, almost confected sweetness and sort of bitterness from the rye happening on the mid palate. It's a little bit of a, I'm not going to say it's a mess, it's kind of a bit of a battle, and it's a bit of a kind of, not really sure about that, it has to be said. It's kind of, doesn't quite sort of have the progression. It's kind of all a bit staccato-y, it's a bit kind of, you know, I can see people, why people would like this. It has a sort of, I guess, a natural, raw kind of character to it, and I can see why few spirits have kept their bottlings pretty much the same. You know, it's always been the sort of the big point with distilleries. You know, they release their spirit on, you know, when there's practically they can, and then it's always a question of, do you leave your bottling in stasis as the stock gets a little bit older, or do you kind of evolve it? And it's, I guess there's no right or wrong answer to that particular question, and I think certainly few spirits have obviously just stuck with the former of that premise. And like I said, it's not a bottling that I kind of warm to, it has to be said.
There was a bottle in the ocean, a bottle in the ocean.
Okay, so one thing when I was waffling on about sort of like the WhistlePig, I forgot to mention the cask makeup, because that's why it's the Old World series. So it's basically straight rye, obviously it's 12 years old, finished in a selection of different types of wine casks. So this particular bottling, 63% Madeira, 30% Sauternes and 7% port. I think they generally tend to stick to roughly that kind of makeup, but I think the percentage does kind of vary slightly from batch to batch, to be honest with you. So let's see what the nose good is. Quite a sort of, I get quite a lot of the Sauternes in actual fact, which is quite a surprise. It's got that kind of sort of botrytis-y kind of sweetness, herbal sweetness, a little bit of chlorine, juicy orange, cinnamon sticks, spicy rye, kind of dusty cereal, a little bit of toast. I'm getting some Madeirized fruit, some dark fruit, a little bit of treacle, a little bit of perfume. It's a lovely nose, it has to be said. Very, very complex. And this is the point, isn't it? This is why you use all these different casks. You'd hate to sort of, you know, stick all the cask types together and come up with a bit of a mess. But in this instance, it's really, really well balanced. It takes a while for the port notes to come through. There's a little bit of black fruit kind of just lingering there in the background, and I think that that's just about the right amount of port character. I mean, the trouble is with port, it can be a little bit sort of, like the Madeira could, you know, they can be very overwhelming. And although it is 63% Madeira casks, it's not OTT Madeira. In actual fact, I think it's just really well balanced. So pass that. A lot of rye, a lot of oak. I was about to say a lot of rye. The mid palate has that a really drying tannic rye, dusty rye, spicy rye, sort of cereally. Yeah, it kicks off with again sort of like the Madeirized fruit, the slightly sort of herbal honey from the Sauternes, and then it kind of hits the mid palate when all its tannins come in, along with the sort of like the rye, the intensity of the spice. Again, there's a little bit of a chlorinated note, and it kind of, the intensity kind of stops relatively quickly, but it still lingers. So the kind of the casks kind of stop, if you like, and then the rye kind of hits the sort of the end palate and continues on. A little bit of coffee, hickory possibly on the finish. again, I think a really, really good whiskey. I love the sort of the combination of the cask. If I was going to be ultra critical, it could do with being a little bit longer, but maybe that's the 45%. Maybe that's why they decided to drop to 43. Obviously, by dropping to 43, they would have to chill filter, which again, I guess would remove some of the intensity. But in saying that, I remember doing an episode of the show on the WhistlePig range, and I'm fairly certain that it was the 43% bottlings at the time, and I remember them being really, really good. So maybe it wasn't such a disaster overall for the whiskey, but certainly, I guess, looking at it from a kind of like a slightly detracted sort of stage, you kind of like go, well, why go from 43, and why is it so bloody expensive? You know, that's always a kind of question. Question obviously I can't answer, but the 45% bottling, yeah, that was pretty good.
Behind, from the ashes you appear, as soon as you got near, the year I disappeared.
On to the Knob Creek. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? That's Knob Creek. Quite hard, quite spicy. The rye is hard as nails, earthy. But there's some sweet oak that softens it underneath. Again, it smells quite young. Probably just about sort of like, 2 years old in a day, I think. There's a little bit of violets. There's some unsweetened corn. I'm guessing we're probably somewhere in the 90s with regards to the rye content of the mash bill. Didn't look it up, it has to be said, but there you go. There's a little bit of spice, a little bit of grapefruit, a little bit of citrus. I mean, it is what it is at the end of the day. If you want sort of intensity of rye, then this has got it. But actually, it's got, the oak is quite softening. It's not quite as spicy as I remember it. There's obviously the hardness to it. But yeah, let's sort of pass on. There's a lot of oak on that palate, a lot of sweet, creamy, buttery oak, and the rye is really working its socks off to kind of get through it. But again, when it does come through, it's got that slight sort of hardness to it, the sort of hard, peppery spice, some tannins, nice, juicy. The oak is always kind of omnipresent there, and I guess it's probably to a certain extent sort of offsetting some of the hardness of the rye, it has to be said. Yeah, it's a nice finish. It's a good rye, it has to be said. I would like to see maybe a little bit less oak, and I'm probably certain there are certain batches that probably do have less oak. And I certainly remember, like I said, primarily the bourbon, maybe, and maybe it was, I hadn't ever tasted Knob Creek before, but whenever you mention Knob Creek, I just think of hard, intense rye spice. This has maybe softened it a little bit. Maybe they've kind of gone down that route of attempting to sort of like neuter it a little bit, I suppose. But either way, I mean, I still think that's a really, really good quality rye whiskey. So yeah, different. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Pikesville. So 6 years old and 55%. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Oh, mother, that's damn good. I mean, that's got some lovely maturity to it. Quite subtle whiskey-like notes. I mean, I'm getting quite a lot of sort of barley kind of character. I mean, it's 14%, which is quite high in actual fact. I mean, most American whiskies tend to have only a very small percentage, normally single figures, and it's primarily there just to kind of kickstart the fermentation. So this has actually got quite a lot of rye, and this is what surprised me about the fact this is actually only 51% rye, but it certainly doesn't have anywhere near the sweetness that the Elijah Craig has. The rye is really punching above its kind of weight. rye, spices, violets, coffee, dark honey. Not a huge amount of oak, and I think that's probably where we're at with the Pikesville. The oak is obviously not too intrusive, so it's not adding that level of sweet vanilla and kind of almost emphasising the sweetness of the corn. So it's kind of allowing the rye to kind of come through more than what it actually would have done if given its percentage, if you see what I mean. So you stick your nose in the glass and you think you're smelling something that's actually quite high rye content, but it isn't. Oh, don't you love these dichotomies, it has to be said. There's an astringent citric sharpness that kind of comes through as well. I mean, multi-layered, very complex, stunning, absolutely stunning. I mean, this is, I must have to say, one of my favourite American rye whiskies, and it's a toss-up between this and the standard Pikesville, which I've always held up as a kind of go-to rye. I love the intensity of it. I mean, that is just stunning. It has to be said. I mean, there's no two words about it. I mean, it is just gorgeous rye whiskey. Let's see what that's like. Wow, what a mouthful. I mean, again, the rye kind of comes through really strongly, kicks more than what you would expect it to do, so, and that's because the oak is relatively subtle, well, practically non-existent in actual fact. Juicy, mouth-watering, spicy, over-stewed black coffee, bitter tannins, but again it's softened because the rye content isn't so high, but it's got the intensity there, but it's not 90-odd%, so it's not got the hardness. There's a softness there to the rye spices. Okay, you can argue it's a little bitter. Like I said, it's that over-stewed black coffee bitterness that kind of comes through on the finish. Oh, it's just stunning. I mean, it really is, and it lingers even though it's 55%. I'm going to put a little drop of water with it. It doesn't actually need water, but I'm going to just see what happens at the end of the day. A little youthful now. It has brought out some younger, kind of oilier spirit notes, but again, I wouldn't say it's not fusel. A little bit more oak now has come through. The spice has kind of now dialed down, and it's where I would expect the nose to be at 51% rye, and a little bit more corn fatness now, which is possibly the reason why they've opted to bottle this at 55%, because then that retains a little bit more of that kind of rye intensity, but it gives you the option of putting a little drop of water with it just to sort of knock back some of that rye. Let's see what that's like. Oh my, that's so juicy, succulent, silky, elegant. I mean, you know, those kind of, just keep adding those synonyms to it. It is just absolutely to die for. It's not too bitter. It's not, I mean, there was a bitterness there right on the end. You're not getting away from that. Like I said, that over-stewed kind of black coffee bitterness, but it's so well contained. There's so much kind of oxidized fruit and juicy kind of fruit notes. It's just absolutely gorgeously balanced, it has to be said. So, I mean, this is one of these kind of whiskies that works really well without water and really well with a little drop of water. I mean, just, it's not a cheap bottling, but it's cheaper than the WhistlePig, and that is just stunning.
What can I do?
Right, okay, so on to the final rye of the afternoon. This is the Barrell Craft Spirits small batch rye, 57.85%. Let's see what the nose gives on this end, Charlie. Ooh, now that's a different animal. It's got some rye spice, kicking off with earthy rye spice, sweet rye as well, lemon, apricot, tobacco, almond paste, corn paste, pepper. There's a little mintiness kind of coming through as well. There's some vanilla oil. There's not a huge amount of oak. The oak is all kind of sitting in the background. It's not adding a huge amount of sweetness. And the rye is just spot on. 89% is rye is just. There's quite a sort of like a column still kind of character. I'm guessing the Canadian rye, although some of the American rye may well be column still distilled, but it has that kind of lightness of column still dried fruit. Yet there's a density there. There's some obvious pot still weight kind of coming through. Some cereal, I mean, stunning, absolutely stunning. And this is just, you know, a testament to Barrell Craft Spirits Blender. Stunning, absolutely stunning, it has to be said. Oh, let's see what it goes like. Oh, that's intense. Oh, that's lots of rye. Really woody, dark rye spice, leather, tobacco, hazelnut, a little bit of vanilla, pepper. Oh my, that's intense. The rye really hits the top of the palate, and there's citrus notes, and it's kind of like really banging the palate, it has to be said. And the spices are just kind of going absolutely nuts, it has to be said. I mean, there's some lovely fruit underneath there. There's some oxidised fruit, some maturity. There's some, again, high tone, slightly the column still kind of dried fruits. Wow, spices, absolute spice city on the finish. But it's kind of, there's such a wonderful sort of sweet spice, bitter spice, turmeric, pepper, cumin. I mean, literally, it's a kind of like a kitchen cupboard full of spices. It really is. It is just absolutely stunning. I mean, I hesitate to put a little drop of water with it, it has to be said, because it's almost damn near perfect, it has to be said. The intensity and, woof. Anyway, I'm hoping that the water doesn't ruin it. Okay, it's kind of, it's a little bit more oak coming through now, a bit more sweetness from the vanilla. There's some eucalyptus, some menthol, some black pepper. It's a little bit, even though there's a little bit more oak vanillin, it's not sort of fat oak, it's not fat corn either. It's kind of almost a little bit leaner, I would say, with a little bit of water. I mean, that's not something I was kind of expecting, to be honest with you. But, you know, it's, I think still I would stick with this neat, but it's certainly a little drop of water hasn't done anything untoward to it. Let's see what the pass like now. Okay, not quite so spicy now. A little bit more oak, a little bit more corn character kind of coming through. There's a little bit more sweetness, less of that intense bitter spice, and it's a little longer. A touch of menthol coming through now. A little bit of kind of cereal, raw cereal, but it's not too intrusive. It's a little bit more column still character kind of coming through on the finish as well. It kind of feels more Canadian, and I suppose, you know, I don't know the sort of the percentage of the different whiskies, but maybe the Canadian is a little bit higher. Who knows? But I mean, it certainly doesn't do harm putting a little drop of water with it, but I personally would just go for that neat. I mean, you don't need to put the water with it. You just want the intensity. You want to experience it as nature intended, and certainly either way. I mean, that's just stunning, absolutely stunning.
Chasing our faults like sinners scar, and you will never
Okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Well, I think today's episode of the show is everything I would hope it was going to be. It has to be said. I mean, I love rye whiskey. It is certainly something that really ticks all my kind of boxes. It has to be said, and it's not one-dimensional. Rye whiskey is not just rye whiskey. It's just like saying that all single malt whiskies are single malt whiskies. If you're at the end of the day, there's so much kind of difference and sort of. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show up. Well, today's episode has been everything I hoped it would be. It's shown how the rye whiskey in its all its different facets, it has to be said, and that's one of the things I kind of just absolutely love about it. It's American whiskey just has this sort of like, it's all about the mash bill at the end of the day, but even then it can throw up some real surprises. And although the Elijah Craig was pretty much, as I would expect, a relatively low rye content mash bill to be, lots more sweeter corn and that kind of thing, and a more approachable sweeter side of rye whiskey. Still absolutely gorgeous. Like I said, if you've never had rye whiskey before and really want to start experimenting with it, that is a really good place to start with. Few spirits, like I said, it's not a style I really enjoy. It's too raw, it's too young. Yes, okay, there are some people that enjoy that kind of youthful rawness, it has to be said, but for me, when there's so many other more intriguing and interesting rye whiskies, I would much rather go for something in that ilk. The WhistlePig, I mean, no denying the quality of what goes into the bottle, it has to be said. You can argue the toss about the ABV to the end of the day, but I think the makeup of the casks and all of that kind of is just absolutely superb. I mean, it's different, intriguing, interesting. I just only wish it wasn't so bloody expensive, but that's kind of life for you. Knob Creek, it kind of delivers what you would expect from Knob Creek, although in this particular batch there was more oak and more sweetness, and I wouldn't say it kind of blunted the rye intensity, but it certainly softened it. So it's kind of like a little bit of kind of Knob Creek light, if you like, I suppose. Pikesville, absolutely stunning. I mean, there is a reason why that is really highly thought of, and again, intriguing because it tastes like a higher percentage rye content, and that is, to me, I think the reason why that does that is because there's not quite so much oak character. I mean, they obviously have to use new oak, but it's just not that intrusive, not that intense. I mean, when you consider that it's pretty much the same mash bill as the Elijah Craig, and it ends up with a completely different whiskey. It's just sort of light and day, it has to be said. And the Barrell craft spirits, like I said, since I tasted their stuff, I'm a big, huge fan. I mean, their whiskey is incredible, it has to be said. Again, not cheap, but not as expensive as some, but the quality is mind-blowing, and considering that they have a gold and silver range above this is their entry-level stuff, and like I said when I did the episode of the show on them, if the quality of their entry-level stuff was mind-blowing. I mean, I hate to think what the quality of their gold and silver range is like, but anyway, maybe one of these days they'll kindly send me a load of samples of that and I can do an episode of the show on it. But then again, maybe they won't. Who knows? Anyway, that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. I thought it's been a whole load of fun. So, all that's left to say is good afternoon and good dramming.
behind. From the ashes you appeared, as still as you got near. The year I disappeared in the ocean of your watered eyes. And now